I think that, oh, okay.
It's on. Okay.
We are now recording, everybody.
Yep. If you're shy, as I keep telling my students, you can feel free to turn off your video. But I believe everyone looks good on the video at the moment. All right, hi everyone. Thanks for joining the section today. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owner of the land where we're zooming in, and pay respect to the elder past, present, and emerging. And good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thanks for joining the inaugural seminar to launch the book Assessing the Landscape of Taiwan and Korea Studies in Comparison. And this is organized by the Australasian Taiwan Study Association, which is, as you all know, newly established. And this is the first seminar that we're hosting. And for most of you who already know me, I'm Lennon Chang. I'm the president of the association, and I'm also a senior lecturer in criminology at Monash University. So just a little bit background on the association. The establishment of the Australasian Taiwan Study Association was inspired by the late Professor Emeritus Bruce Jacobs. It's great that we have Songjun here. Jung-Sim, sorry, I pronounced your name wrong again at the most important minute. To join us, as well as she'll give us she'll speak to us about the book later. And the association has established to promote research and teaching in Australasian region, including Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific. We have been talking about the establishment of the association or groups like this in the past few years, and finally we got a chance to formally have it launched and registered. So we are glad now we have this association, and hope that all of you can join us as a member. We just have our membership form designed, and we're happy to pass it to you if you're interested in join as a member. And it doesn't need to be in Australia in order to join a member. We welcome around the world. And apart from the regular seminar section, apart from this one, we will have in September and one in November. And we have Phyllis here, who is going to give a presentation in November. We are also organizing a Taiwan Update Forum, as well as a film festival in October 2021. So if you don't want to miss any of these events, please follow us on Facebook page, or just join our membership, and you'll be included in our mailing list, so you'll be able to get the information. And we're honored to have the opportunity to be the organizer to host this book launch. As I mentioned, the association is inspired by the late Professor Bruce Jacobs, and it's especially meaningful for the association to host this event as our inaugural event. And we are pleased to have, of course, the coordinators, Professor Niki Alsford and Professor Sojin Lim. I'll be banned to go to Korea in the future, both from the University of Central Lancashire, to talk about the book. And today we're also honored to have Mr. Abraham Lee, Taiwan's Consul General in Melbourne, or I think the official name should be the representative of Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, Melbourne, to launch the book. And of course, Bruce, as a good friend and a long-time supporter of Taiwan, has done such a great job in promoting Taiwan studies. Therefore, I think it's especially significant that Mr. Lim, Abraham, can be here to launch the book on behalf of the Taiwanese government. Without further ado, I'll pass the microphone to Abraham.
Okay. Thank you, Lennon, and Professor Niki Alsford, and Dr. Sojin Lim and Jung-Sim. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's really my honor and privilege to be with everybody online for the book launch and organized by the ATSA, Australasian Taiwan Study Association. This book, assessing the landscape of Taiwan and Korean study in comparison, offer a reflection on the state of the field of Taiwan and the Korea studies. Taiwan and Korea share not only similarity, but also many differences. Both have national identity formed in a Japanese colonial period and were dubbed the Four Asian Tigers with Singapore and Hong Kong in the 1980s to 1990s. Whereas the end of the colonization in 1945 ignited the light of independence for Korea, Taiwan has walked down different paths of development, faced with the complicated cross-strait relationship and the growing tension of geopolitics. As you may be aware, one of the editors of the book, Emeritus Professor Bruce Jacobs, is Taiwan's true and lifelong friend. He was also known in Taiwan by his local nickname, Big Bear, 大胡子, where Big Bear or Bruce. He inspired just as much affection and respect in the minds of Taiwanese people. Bruce first arrived in Taiwan in 1965 as a postgraduate student in history at National Taiwan University. In the 54 years that followed, he dedicated his life to studying and teaching Taiwanese history, politics, and democratization. Through his research on Taiwan's identity and democratization, Bruce helped the world develop a wider understanding of why Taiwan merits the support of the international community. Bruce played a very important role in enhancing Taiwan's relationship with Australia in different ways. From the early work at the ACC, Australia-China Council, to his efforts in promoting academic interest in and the discussion of Taiwan in Australia. In year 2018, Bruce was awarded the Order of Brilliant Star with Grand Golden from the government of Taiwan for his lifelong contributions of democratization and human rights. I was so fortunate getting to know Bruce in the first few months since my arrival in Melbourne in May year 2019. I sat down with him several times, and each time for a deep and stimulating conversation about Taiwan. Bruce genuinely cared about Taiwan and his friends there. He always spoke of his expectations of Taiwan's politics and the government with such enthusiasm and excitement. In fact, I know he would have hopped on a plane to visit Taiwan anytime if his health permitted. I last saw Bruce at the Taiwan National Day reception hosted by my office at the RACP Club. That was October year 2019. I really, and he enjoyed chatting with many friends. I knew it was very important to him to be there, and it meant so much us to see him there. It's very hard to believe you have only known someone for only half a year when it feels like a lifetime. So more than a senior expert in Taiwan studies, Bruce was a dear friend and a teacher to me. Bruce encouraged Taiwan to preserve freedom and democracy, and his achievements shaped the values shared by Australia and Taiwan, brought our two countries together. tonight we found a perfect way to remember Bruce by juxtaposing Taiwan and South Korea and trying to broaden our understanding of the region. I do remember Jung-Sim once told me that the priority of Bruce's life are number one is the family, number two is Taiwan, and the writing, and the nature. So we believe the book not only sheds fresh insight into Asian studies, but also passes on Bruce's legacy for generations to come. Once again, I would like to thank Lennon and the ATSA for having me tonight. And I'm pleased and honored to officially launch this book. We encourage you get a copy, and may all of you enjoy peace and good health. Thank you.
Thank you, Abraham.
Thank
So next we have Jung-Sim to say a few words before we pass the microphone to Craig.
Thank you for having me here today. I wanted to share the slides. Can you see that?
Yep.
I don't know why the slides is not, yeah, now it's okay. I can say, 大家你好, 안녕하세요. Good evening here. And I would like to talk about Bruce's book or edited books. And I just put in here because the current one is quite a big image. I put it in, and then just the other books, edited book, co-edited book, or just he published the book. So maybe if you wanted to look at, and maybe Wikipedia has more than this, but I thought it's okay to look at. And then the other one is a book chapter. And also this topic is related with Taiwan and Korea. That's one article he wrote. And Bruce and I shared so many trips, adventures, and new places together. So I was quite lucky with following him, or to join most of his lecture and seminars in Australia and overseas. And especially he went to Taiwan. I followed him several times, once a year, even though I didn't go to Korea, and I went to Taiwan. And luckily I saw twice and Boomerang lunch talk in Boomerang lunch talk at the Australian office in Taipei. I know Kevin Maggie organized, hosted there, and then we had a really nice time. And the other one is this book. I thought about, I read this book already. First part, of course, I didn't read every chapters, but introduction I read. And then one part, it makes me a little bit, not sad, but looking back to our old good times that remembered me. And he's just writing the kind of things. Sometimes he did a lot of writing concentrate on while he was doing chemo. So I said, why are you doing this? And he said, almost finished. Only one author of a chapter didn't come yet. So that's what he did at the end of 2018, he told me. But eventually he mentioned 2019, middle of 2019, he told me, and that person didn't reply. So maybe I couldn't publish this one, and maybe I'm not belong to here anymore. But I didn't know he sent to Niki and Sojin about this. It says this section will introduce the various chapters. If my cancer wins first, this will have to be done by Niki or Sojin, possibly writing their own preface and deleting this section. But two of them decided not to delete. So I don't know, I can say thank you or what is his intention, I don't know. But I'm happy to see this book is out. So this is what I felt. And also some people mentioned about him. He gave a lot of introduction or some understanding to Taiwan or China that way. Of course, at that time he didn't research about Korea yet, so people doesn't know about that. But he also gave to me several things, and I can say 3F first. First is Formosa, Taiwan, and second, friends, and third one is family. So left is family, but still just Formosa, Taiwan, and friends from Taiwan, friends a lot. So I'm really happy with that, what he left to me. And the other one is what we went to. Bruce loved to look around places and new places everywhere. And we visited a lot of places. And then I thought about, I can say thank you to everybody. And maybe I can't say a lot of people individually. So I asked Lennon to, maybe I can say this time a little bit about Bruce and what Bruce couldn't say last word to everybody, to you, and thank you, those kind of things. I know Bruce's former PhD student, Mark and Matal, Joel and Chai-Jun, and everybody we remember, and maybe Justin too, but I can't remember all of them he had. And also in Taiwan, he has Martin and Michael, several Michaels there. And then his best friends, more than 60 years friends, Don, and also Bill Stanton and Xue Hayan, and also other people I met from Taiwan, and Stepan and other people. And in Europe, we met several people. I know Niki and Sojin, of course, and then David, Sasha in Slovenia, and Mingye in UK, and Jonathan, and also some other peoples I can't remember all. I remember, but I can't say all of those. And also in Australia, Rowan visited several times here, and Rowan introduced our other people to us, especially to me. So that's Delia I met from there, and then from Delia, and then also Lennon and Craig, and also I know all MOPA people in Taiwan and in Australia, TECO office, TECO. So TECO people, and Abraham and Lynn and Warren there, Warren and Hannah and also Elaine last time. So everyone has a lot of present for us. Their existing is our kind of gift anyway. And also in North America, we visited several places, and then he gave a talk, and Andre and Tom Goldie also, we met from there, and then we met in Taiwan too. So I know that's Academia Sinica, quite a lot of people from there too. So all those people, and also especially TDG members, and in Australia also one is David Shack from Brisbane, and I think we visited just a couple of images I put here, and then you can see where he went, and then some places from home. So yeah, Mateo already visited our place, and then Kevin also knew. So Bruce is on the bottom, middle of on the bottom. That's from our back garden. Just before he passed away, 1 month away from that time. So he was still reading. His mind, he couldn't speak well that time, but he read. Even though he was a little bit sick, but he was reading that time. So he read the book and he enjoyed his time, and then he was happy with all his friends. So those friends he passed to me. So I'm really happy with that. Thank you for everything you gave to two of us. And thank you. 감사합니다 and 도시아. So.
Thank you, Jung-Sim. That's very touching. And although I say the association is inspired by Bruce, Jung-Sim is one of the key person that is pushing us to have the association set. And we have Delia as the vice president, Craig as the public officer, we have Phyllis here as the secretary. So we hope we can get everyone's support of this association and make Taiwan Studies in Australasian region a successful one. Next, I'll pass it to Craig. Craig, do you want to take over from here?
Yeah, thanks, Lennon. And thanks, Jung-Sim. That was really touching. And I just want to add also that Jung-Sim is the Korean Studies librarian at Monash, also kind of bringing together Korea and Taiwan as well in a different way. And of course, recently we've been working together on ATSA, so I've been really lucky to get to know Jung-Sim. So yeah, so we are fortunate we have Jung-Sim today, and we also have the two other editors of this book. It's quite rare to have a book actually on Korean and Taiwan studies, which is kind of surprising because, as we all know, they're very similar in many ways, and they have a similar past, a colonial and post-colonial past, being stuck between more than a few empires. So hats off to the editors and to the authors, because the authors did, for many of the chapters, the authors did maintain this comparative analysis, which I think is actually quite difficult beyond the linguistic and historical knowledge that is needed. I think it's quite a difficult task to analyze in these ways. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to introduce the speakers. So the two editors, I believe we're going one by one. So I think Niki's going to speak first, and then Sojin, and then we'll have all the questions at the end. So first up, I'm going to introduce Professor Niki Alsford from the University of Central Lancashire. He's written many books on Taiwan, some of them published in Taiwan, some of them published outside of Taiwan. And most recently, he's authored Transitions to Modernity in Taiwan, the Spirit of 1895 in the Session of Formosa to Japan. Professor Alsford, would you like to go ahead and say hello?
So unmute myself first, the most common expression of our age, right? You're on mute. Thank you very much, Craig. Thank you, everyone, for inviting us. I'm really, truly pleased to hear that we have in the development of the Australasian Taiwan Studies Association, and I will always give my full support to follow the dreams and ambitions of Professor Bruce Jacobs. Indeed, just a short introduction to myself. My name is Niki Alsford. I'm the Professor in Asia Pacific Studies here at the University of Central Lancashire. I know Bruce and been part of studying Taiwan for a number of years. I first met Bruce in Taiwan when I was a postgraduate student, and my relationship with him had developed since then. I first met Jung-Sim, I think, was in Denmark at the European Association of Taiwan Studies, which again was probably now more than 10 years ago. So this is a relationship that had developed. And I kind of want to start with taking a quote from Samuel Coleridge from The Friend by saying that a dwarf sees further than the giant when he has the giant's shoulders to mount on. And I always feel that that was really the big ambition in putting this book together, was to say that we can achieve what we can achieve because we've had people such as Bruce, who have in many ways have done so much for our understanding of the region. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm not really used to using Zoom, so do bear with me. So I think this should share it. Does everyone see the screen okay if I now do this?
Not yet.
Yep, is that all okay?
No, actually, we can't see it.
Okay.
The green button at the bottom of the screen?
Yeah, maybe I'm just not pressing the right one, bear with. Okay.
There we go.
Should see it now, okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's fabulous. Now, if I do this, you should see the whole screen. It's being a bit slow. So let's just cross our fingers and hope that that's that. So yes, so again, thank you very much. And putting together the book, I think, probably is a good place to start with. Indeed, coming across that sentence that Jung-Sim had highlighted was perhaps one of the hardest parts, was putting together the finishing part of the introduction to the book. It has been by far the hardest thing that I have ever had to write. And I think because of that, I wanted to kind of keep the sentence in as a way of just reflecting the completion of the book, of which Bruce, myself, and Sojin had begun at a conference just a few years prior. The purpose of the book, I have just swatch to the next slide. Does everyone see that okay? Because I know sometimes the screen's shared. No, so that was good. Otherwise, I'd go through the whole thing and we're still on the first page. Okay, that's what's happening. Okay.
Niki, right now we see Cold War and the decentering of globalized capital.
That is, yeah, so you do see that. Okay, that's fine. I'll just,
But,
okay.
Sorry to jump in. You still have the next slide thing, not the whole page like we tried before. So can you?
Okay, so I'll stop. Okay, let me. Oh, there's both positives and negatives. The fact that we can all come together is a result of this. That's a positive thing. The technology was still at that bit, so it's still okay. Now we should be sharing a screen.
We're all terribly jealous.
Yeah, there we go. Right. Okay, so the purpose of the purpose.
You're not sharing.
It's not.
I'm not sure. Oh, I have to press share. Don't. Oh, the challenge. The challenge is now we should be fine.
There we go. I think it's
there
perfect.
we go. Okay, we forget all of that bit there and we move on with the show. So yeah, the purpose really of the book itself was to kind of reinforce an importance of area studies programs, and in particular, in the case of the Asia Pacific region. The journey really to this book actually began prior to me taking up my post in Asia Pacific Studies at the University of Central Lancashire, and actually began in Prague. So I was working at the Oriental Institute at the Czech Academy of Sciences, and my office was next door to a library. The library was just being referred to, I would say, when I say library, it was more of a room full of books as opposed to a library in the organizational sense. It was being referred to as the Korean Library. And these were a collection of books, namely from North Korea, that was just sat gathering dust. And that began my thoughts on the role that Korean studies can play. I've been part of the Taiwan studies program since I did my postgraduate studies in Taiwan. So I started to initiate an interest in exploring certain connections. When I was at SOAS, the University of London, I taught on modern East Asian history. And so Korea obviously played a very important and central role within the teaching, but it wasn't something that I had researched. So my journey really began there. Then when I took up my post at the University of Central Lancashire, within a year of taking up my post, I was asked or tasked to lead the International Institute of Korean Studies, of which that I co-directed with Dr. Sojin Lim. And I was asked to expand on the successes that we have found within our Korean Studies program. So within the successes that we had within our Korean Studies program, I was asked to expand on this by establishing other institutes and centers within the region. And so in 2018, we launched the Northern Institute of Taiwan Studies. And that the conference of which this book is a product of was, in a sense, our launch. So I do find this idea of the book serving a launching for further Taiwan studies program actually a really good and positive thing. So in 2018, as part of the launch for the Northern Institute of Taiwan Studies, Sojin and I decided that a good way to bring the two together is to search out the comparison. The comparison for us initiated first, not so much on the comparison of Taiwan to Korea, but on the comparison of Taiwan studies to Korean studies. In Taiwan studies, we have seen shifts, we see movements. See, we have the European Association of Taiwan Studies, we have the North American Association of Taiwan Studies, and now gladly to see the Australasian Association as well. But we do see disciplinary shifts. And one of the key areas that we saw was this kind of a movement from the economics and the political sciences into the arts and humanities. We saw more and more papers being presented at conferences that actually explored the humanities side of Taiwan studies. And interestingly, we see an almost opposite in the case of Korean studies, where we saw an arts and humanities beginning something focusing on language and linguistics, and it's being a shift into the social sciences. So this is what captured our attention, first of all, to begin. Let's bring in some of the heavyweights, so to speak, of these representatives within these studies, area studies programs, together in a room to talk about this. And so we had, it's probably quite small on people's screens, and I do apologize, it's trying to get it all onto a single page. So we can see we had our workshop. Our workshop had sponsorship both by the Taiwan office here in the UK, as well as the is it the Ministry of Korean, Sojin, which
Academy of Korean Studies.
Okay, that was it, the Academy of Korean Studies. Both sponsored it, which was a great opportunity for us to actually bring two ministries together, essentially from Korea and Taiwan. So we started with looking at the field of study and the research resources, and we were fortunate to bring Professor Thomas Gold from the University of California, Berkeley. And there we can see that we had some really quite big names in the fields of study of both Korean and Taiwan studies. So we worked ourselves through this. On the second session, we looked at historiography and history before moving on to the politics and economics of day two. The second day of the conference, we went to Brockholes, which is a nature reserve just outside of our university campus. The University of Central Lancashire is fortunate in the fact that we are surrounded by the national parks of the Pennines, the Yorkshire Dales, and the Lake District. So for anyone who's unfamiliar to the UK, that generally means we get lots of rain. But we decided that we would take a gamble, and then on the second day we would have a barbecue. Obviously this needed to be booked months in advance, but we were really lucky. The day was a very, very warm day. And it was here that we had the opportunities to kind of talk about what should we do with these 2 days worth of conversations. And that's where we made the decision that rather than just a single output, an edited volume, we actually produced four outputs, 2 special issue journal articles and 2 books. Was it 4? Was it 3? Sojin, I can't remember. I think it's 3 outputs.
1 book and 2 journal edited.
3. My apologies, I'm giving us more than we actually had. So yeah, so 3 outputs, this edited volume, and then there was 2 special issues. So the key thing for us in the conversations around putting these together was to start unpacking what does it mean to be a field of study. Now, for those of us who study Taiwan, Taiwan has often been seen as being a marginal player, or that sits between different fields of study. Is it an extension of Chinese studies, or is it a field in its own right? And my philosophy, or my position on this, is very much that was shared by Bruce, and that is that Taiwan has its own position, and we should understand Taiwan for Taiwan. And the work in which that I have done is very much to almost decenter that, to look at this in an alternative reorientation of the way in which that we view Taiwan. So my own personal research has looked at this through the Austronesian migration and Taiwan as the cradle of the Austronesian linguistic migration as a way of reorientating the way in which we look at Taiwan. So I have often presented my work at a number of these different regional conferences. I've served on the board of the European Association of Taiwan Studies, and I've presented in North America of the North American Association of Taiwan Studies, and I very much would like to play a role or a part within the Australasian Taiwan Studies Association. I think it's a fantastic thing to be looking at. So what we decided we wanted to do at the conference, and what became part of the book, was to say what Taiwan is and what Taiwan is not, and the importance of Taiwan studies as a program, and look at these shifts that we're seeing within the different disciplines. And so this moves us then to our view of how, in this comparison, do we look at Korea and Korean studies. And at this moment now, I shall hand over to Sojin. Sojin, do you want me to just press the buttons?
Yes, I will ask you to flip.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
I didn't get to introduce you, Sojin. I have to introduce you.
You like to talk.
Both of you at the beginning, but if I can, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sojin Lim. Sojin, the name is not that difficult. University of Central Lancashire as well, but in Korean studies. And I went through your recent publications because you've done lots of really interesting work on North Korea, which is always a lot of fun. Your most recent journal article just came out, the Journal of Peace and Unification. It's titled The Paradox of Unsustainability in UN Sustainable Development Goals. And now I've interrupted your talk, so I better let you get back to it. I'm sorry, Sojin. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Craig and Lennon, to invite me and Niki today. This session is really joyful, but at the same time very sad, because that reminds me of those days which I communicated with Bruce. I still remember the day when I met Bruce and Jung-Sim for the first time in my life. Thanks to Niki, I could meet many colleagues in Taiwan studies in Europe, but I never met colleagues in other places yet that time. And Bruce was such a person who really greeted me like we've known for each other for such a long time, so friendly, and giving me this little wine from Australia, because I was the one who was organizing that workshop. And Jung-Sim was, as we all know, gave me such a warm greetings as well. So it was very good memory of me. And throughout the edited volume work, I learned a lot from Bruce, and felt like I was really privileged to have this opportunity with him. But in the middle, as Jung-Sim mentions, that we had to wait for a long time, more than a year, because one of the expected authors had medical issues. Then finally, she withdrew. So that was why we couldn't publish this book before Bruce passed away. And that is one thing which I really feel pity about the book. But anyway, so getting back to the talk, by continuing what Niki was talking. So yes, we had this workshop based on the idea that because I joined UCLan as a Korean studies person, and that time Niki was the director of our Korean Institute, and both of us began to work on the establishing of Taiwan Studies Institute. And now we have about 5 colleagues at UCLan who's solely expertised in Taiwan, which is the biggest size in terms of the academics in the UK. But that time it was only a Niki, and I was supporting Niki to create this institute by bringing new colleagues from the Taiwan studies side. Then we had this opportunity to come up with, what about having all colleagues together? And that was the beginning. And if I may introduce what has happened in Korean studies side in Europe, because that was the main idea of comparing this book these studies in the book. We started with the European Korean Studies Association in 1977, and it was still until today heavily focused on language and linguistics, history, and literature. And the British Korean Studies Association was established in the late 1980s, and still it was influenced by this mode of area studies in Korean studies. And recently, the small group of academics in Europe began to think that now we have very much study done in linguistics, literature, history, but not having much focus on social sciences. So the group of academics began to think about to have this social sciences Korean studies group from 2017. And ever since, we are now having this social sciences Korean studies European network, call it Sokun. So in Korean, Sogun means speak in a very quiet way. And this Sokun workshop is the network which we have a very small group of academics yet. So that was why we named it as a Sokun. And as you can see, from language root to history, literature, now in Korean studies in Europe, we are having very active social sciences research, and more and more PhDs and the postdocs are coming out based on their social sciences research background. And as Craig introduced, the North Korean studies also is being merged in Korean studies. And very interestingly, I think it's also the Trump effect. Don't get me wrong, I don't like President Trump that much, but no, that is the fact that he kind of entertained us a lot and made many people get into this North Korea, having the interest into North Korea, thanks to him. So in Europe, including UK, very active research is going on about North Korea itself as well. So that is the main development of Korean studies in Europe. Niki, can you turn over the slide, please? Thank you. And then this is how we came up with the idea about the book. One thing we kind of missed in this edited volume was the chapter about economic development itself, because the economic development after the colonialism, and as these Asian four tiger countries would be the one of the well-known area, how Taiwan and Korea can be compared also as a developmental states. But apart from it, we try to include most of the kind of interesting topics we could come up with in terms of the comparison. And we addressed not only about the politics and international relations and history, also about the religion, which we haven't looked at that much. And also David fell at SOAS and myself talked about how the program itself could be compared. And David suggested to write one chapter with me. So at the end of the book, we also talked about the Taiwan Studies program at SOAS in London and Korean Studies program at UCLan in north of England. And in that way, we could also see the development of both the Taiwan studies and Korean studies within UK and how it's been developed and have similarities and the differences. So this was the main area, main chapterization of our book. Niki, do you want to add anything about the chapterization before I move to the next slide?
No, just basically what you have said. Obviously, this was never meant to be definitive, the defining comparison between these two fields of studies, but what it was meant to do was to open up a conversation about how we can make these comparisons. And so, yeah, that was our initial intention, and we brought together the people that we think that best represent those comparisons.
Thank you. So can you then flip to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this was the moment when we decided what to do at the workshop. And at the beginning, Bruce and Niki were there to work as editors, and also they invited me to the floor to be a part of it because of the Korean studies side. And yeah, at that moment, I remember that I was still very kind of shy and was a little bit in the middle of nowhere because it was first time for me to edit a book actually. So I was really worried about my capacity and whether I could do that. And really, as I said, I learned a lot throughout. So that was the moment when we discussed with the participants at the workshop about this book. And also, as Niki mentioned, we had one special issue at journal about North Korea itself, and also another special issue about Taiwan itself at the journal. So we have two different special issues at journals in each studies, and then we have one comparison as an edited volume. So this workshop turned out to be quite successful, but not only that, not only about this academic path. Niki, can you? Thanks. So this is the scene of the table. As you see the tables, you may recognize familiar faces in Taiwan studies, but we also have colleagues from Korean studies. And everybody who joined the workshop said it's quite surprising how much we have similarities in both studies, and we've never thought to compare them in a way. And it was quite fascinating, and we discussed a lot of different issues. And there was quite also scholarly way, was quite a productive lunchtime all together, and such a fun. And this book I think can show that we can now work all together, and we can have further works in a way to have both studies together with. And also in terms of the colleagues, I feel like I'm a part of Taiwan studies as well, because I became so familiar with all these faces and names, and I know who's who, and now I even get to know about these new colleagues in this association as well. So yeah, it's quite good experience for me as well. And I would like to say thank you to all of the chapter authors who've been really patient with me about the editing journey, and also thanks to Jung-Sim to be part of it. And after Bruce left us, Jung-Sim used to call me from Australia, and we used to talk things over the phone in Korean. But yeah, I just met Jung-Sim only once, but no, it's been like a way that we've known each other for a really long time already. So yeah, this is the basic thing about how this book came out, and what was the intention, and how it looks like now, and how these two area studies in the field can come along with together well. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you again for the host to invite us here, and also thanks to my co-editors as well. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Sojin. Thank you. Thanks both of you, Niki and Sojin. That was a very personal look at how this book came together. Really interesting perspective. So I know I have questions, but let's open the floor, and would anybody like to ask the first question? You can raise your hand. Oh, there we go. We got. Please mute yourself. I don't know who that is. I can't find them on the screen.
I think I just add up one thing, because when I sent out the brochure to colleagues, one of the questions to me was whether this book is based on a forum or conference. And I think based on the photo I saw Professor Michael Shaw was there. So obviously this is based on the conference that you organize, right?
Yes,
Yes, so that's right. So it was based on that workshop. It was a selection of papers. We also were quite fortunate that we were able to invite authors that were unable or weren't at the workshop to kind of contribute to this book as well. And I think I saw a face within the thing. We want to say a big thank you to Evan, who stepped in to write the chapter that the author pulled out. So we really do appreciate Evan's very quick turnover and the contribution for the chapter on Taiwan and transformation. So Evan, if you are there in cyberspace, a big thank you to you.
Yeah, he's there.
I'll just say briefly that I'm grateful for the opportunity to have written that chapter, partly sort of out of a long-standing debt of gratitude to Bruce, who actually helped to push me to write one of my first publications, an article on the study of identity in Taiwan history, and that came out of a conference presentation that I made in 2006 that he was an attendee. And at the end of that conference, he said, you should really, submit this somewhere. And so that eventually became one of my first publications. I was, as Niki will remember, hesitant to write this essay, only not because I didn't want to write the essay, but because I had a number of other things that I was trying to do at that exact same moment. Get a book out, get an edited volume out. So I'm delighted that he was persistent, and Sojin was persistent in coming back to me, because it really was illuminating for me to be able to read and think about recent scholarship on Taiwan, and then to try to put it into a framework that is hopefully useful to help set up the other essays in the volume, which I'm very much looking forward to receiving in the next few days. I believe it's on its way. So.
It's on its way.
Thank you both, and everybody who was involved in it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Evan. Next questions.
Sorry, could I just quickly jump in? If Niki could stop sharing the screen so that Craig can perhaps see the participants and see the virtual hands.
Oh yeah, sorry, I just
up.
don't even see the screen. I turned that screen off.
I stopped.
You have stopped. Yeah, it's fine now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Niki.
No worries.
Okay, if I can get in a question. So when you were speaking, I was thinking about, there's Taiwan Korean studies. Is it a comparative study? Is it two totally different area studies? And how are you going about this? And when I lived in Taiwan, I noticed Korean studies was not very developed. I think it's been doing much better in the last 10 years or so. And then in Korea as well, Taiwan studies wasn't really there. I don't know if it's doing any better, but there have been a couple exceptions to this, like Chen Guangxing has written a few things through the Imperialist Eye, or the Imperialist Eye, something like that. So did Taiwanese understandings of Korea or Korean understandings of Taiwan influence this book in any way? And I mean academic understandings.
So can I respond? As an academic in Korean studies, yes. After this workshop and during the workshop, I And before the workshop, I had a chance to have a talk with Taiwan studies colleagues. To be honest, it was first time for me to exchange the academic discussion with Taiwan studies side, in the UK. As Craig said, in Korea itself, we don't have Taiwan studies that much developed until today even. So it was quite interesting to listen from Taiwan colleagues about the economic or social or society development and other areas and human development, everything. And personally also, I learned a lot from Taiwanese colleagues that there were a lot of similarities in life, not only in the academic way. So that really occurred to me to think about the similarities and of course differences in between. And when we had the workshop, not only myself, but my colleagues in Korean studies, they didn't think about that much about Taiwan before, but in the development of the discussion and when they had each of our presentation, and they posed a lot of questions based on their own understanding. For example, when a colleague presented about Taiwan, issues about Taiwan, then the colleagues from Korean studies side who's in that area, that subject, asked questions and they could exchange their views and opinions. And in that way, we really began to understand each other a lot more. Then that was quite interesting, I must say. So in that way, that influenced in interpretation of the development of the each chapter.
Yeah, I would just really echo a lot of what Sojin has said. And I think, Craig, you really kind of asked the similar kind of question as what started us thinking prior to the workshop. Because we always felt that the thing that kind of brings them together in terms of the way in which conversations happen is Japan, right? Japan is the kind of that point of conversation that when people within Taiwan studies explore Korea, it's usually in that context, and we were finding the same thing. But of course, we know that reactions to Japan differ greatly within these two places. So questions often asked is why do we have this? And so these kind of were part of these conversations that we were having, but we realized that actually there's a lot more. And the workshop really highlighted this and addressed this in many ways. But I think in that second day when we just had a big open conversation and people were just talking, I think amongst our colleagues in Korean studies is this idea about where we position North Korea. And I think this was really quite a very interesting thing and not something that we necessarily were expecting. Like, you know, when we start talking about holding a marginal position, we were starting to say, you know, Korean studies is a peninsular study, right? It incorporates both the North and the South, but there are a number of our colleagues that do work on North Korea, but would not see themselves as North Korean studies. And this really kind of opened up. So we have taken that conversation further. We have our MA in North Korean studies. This was born out of that idea. But yeah, so it really quite interesting. I think Korean studies, or the study of Korea, is much more prevalent in Taiwan than I would say Taiwan studies is within Korea. And I think there are geopolitical reasons for this. I don't think it needs explanation, but I think we know. But that's not to say that that's not changing, right? And we are finding that the position that Taiwan has is something that's now gaining more global attention. And I think that amongst our colleagues are aware that, you know, our Korean studies colleagues are aware that there is Taiwan and there is associations of study that surrounds that. But yeah, it was interesting conversations that we had at the time. Yes.
Oh, great, thanks to both of you. So it looks like there's further room for the next volume in the Korean language, maybe in Chinese as well.
Yeah.
That's the next project. Questions? Would anybody you can raise your hand or you can just turn on your microphone. It's a small group. Oh, Jung-Sim, please go ahead.
I know this book is the volume 1, and that's Mark Harrison is the editor of series, and maybe Mark can explain about this.
Thanks, Jung-Sim. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I'm not sure I have too much to say. So do you mean Brill and the Taiwan Studies series that they're putting out? So Niki and I are joint editors of a series that Brill is delivering on Taiwan Studies. We've worked through a few submissions so far. So it's early days, but looking forward, I think we should start to see some very substantive volumes coming out quite soon. And I think that's a really positive development for Taiwan Studies internationally. Yeah, I think we all know that there's a lot of really compelling work. Bringing it together to kind of mobilize it is always the challenge. And that's part of what these sorts of projects are about. Maybe Niki could also jump in.
Oh, Niki, you're muted.
We knew it was going to happen, right? Yeah, so it was going to be one of my kind of final comments was to promote the series that was established by Bruce. Bruce brought Mark and I in, and Mark and I made the decision to continue that series. So yeah, we're really pleased to start to see, you know, submissions to this series. So this will be a kind of a really second big series within European publishing houses. See Routledge as being another one. We also see there is another series with Springer. And so this just reinforces those thoughts and those ideas that Bruce held of the importance that Taiwan Studies plays within area studies programs, particularly that pertains to the Asia Pacific region. So what we want to do is to not be a competition to the Routledge series. Obviously, David Fell is my mentor, and that was never an intention to be a direct competitor with him, but it's as a way of complementing. And I think the more opportunities that we have to publish on Taiwan for Taiwan is the benefits that we will see. So yeah, it is a new series, you know, but we are getting submissions in there. So anyone is looking to submitting edited book ideas, translation projects perhaps, do email Mark or I, and we can definitely think about it. All the details obviously are online. Just Google the Brill Taiwan series. You know, we've chosen the color design and all of this thing, so all the books will be a uniform design to this. But yeah, so that's the Brill series that Mark and I now work on.
Great, thanks for that. Thanks, Mark, as well.
Ilya?
Oh, sorry, Delia, didn't see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Craig. I've been a very good citizen and put up my virtual hand. I've been patiently waiting. I'd like to really thank Niki and Sojin for your fascinating talks and walking us basically through the journey of your books and of your book, and also thanks to Abraham and Jung-Sim for your very, very moving stories, and which bring back a lot of good memories of Bruce that we all miss very badly. I have two questions actually. The first question is that Niki mentioned, which I found really interesting, that the trajectory of basically Taiwan studies and Korean studies seem to be the opposite. One is from more social science focused, and from economy or maybe political economy to humanities focus, and then Korean studies was moving from a different direction, from more humanities-centered to more social science-centered. I wonder if this surprised you. I mean, these opposite trajectories surprised you, and if it didn't, why not? And if it did surprise you, and why we have these opposite trajectories? And the second question is, I just found it really fascinating that you're finding so many synergies, the similarities, the differences between Taiwan studies and Korean studies, and certainly from Japan, from this colonial history and different responses to the colonial history, that we really can see some fascinating things happening between the two studies. And after this collaboration, how do you see basically, I think that's a question following up on Craig's question, the future of the collaboration between the two studies, and what are the fascinating areas that would encourage us maybe to step into, or what are the unknown, maybe uncharted areas that you find that have come out of this fascinating collaboration?
Niki, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
It's up to you. Do you want to start?
Thank you very much for the good comments and questions. Yeah, about the different trajectories. From my understanding, within the Europe, other field of studies in the area, studies like Japanese studies and Chinese studies, especially in the UK, all started from the humanities side, languages especially, then developed into the social sciences. And Korean studies history is relatively shorter than those two studies. So that was why we kind of saw the similar pathway compared to those two studies. And that was why when I saw the different way around from Taiwan studies, it was quite interesting rather than surprising, but really interesting for me personally. So yeah, and especially when I wrote this chapter with David Bell, that really showed the clear different paths in between Taiwan studies and Korean studies. So SOAS started from the social sciences, the economic side as well. They had very well-known academics in Taiwan economic development. Then it added the language programs on top of that. And in Korean studies at UCLan, we started from language and developed into the social sciences, and that really represent the development. And yeah, that's, I think, Niki, you want to add up this first question?
Yeah, so I would say that the important things is the shifts. It's not one replacing the other. We haven't seen a decline in the amount of work that's done on Taiwan in terms of the social science and political economy, but we are seeing an increase in the number of submissions within the more the humanities side of things. I think Sojin really touched it on the head about the reasons being, and that's largely to do with teaching programs. I think that's where it has been. So the idea of Japanese, Korean and Chinese obviously has that language centered, but what we were seeing with Taiwan, it wasn't the language aspect because of that being dominated within the Chinese studies. And I think that's where we start to see the arguments coming in about how Taiwan holds a marginal position of Chinese studies. But what we do see is it developing a completely different trajectory. But the language side of things is coming about. There is more and more research being done on Austronesian languages that are spoken by the indigenous people. We have Taiyu. I was part of the when the Taiwan Studies we're part of the Taiwan Studies program at SOAS with the teaching of Taiyu. Not me personally, I didn't do that. That was Professor Bernard Furo, who was part of that particular language program. And I think we are seeing more and more of this. And I think that really is one of the major factors why we saw the development of these area studies within that bit, because language was one of the main purposes of learning those particular regions. And I think that's where we see this. To address your question about the futures, It's actually a really interesting question, because Sojin and I, we collaborate on a number of different projects. We're also later on in the next couple of months, we'll be publishing the Routledge series, a handbook series on Korean studies. We've co-edited that together, and we've often talked about how future collaborations will work out. And one of the areas of which that we've been exploring is this idea of futures, Korean futures and Taiwan futures, right? And start looking at smart cities, artificial intelligence, and the anthropology of the future is an area of which that we have been exploring. Our ideas with this at the moment, though these are still fairly young ideas, is to think about this in terms of an exhibition, co-curating an exhibition on futures and future studies. And we've seen good collaboration, Taiwan, in terms of its the semiconductor industry. We start to see the importance that that plays globally, but we're also seeing the importance that Taiwan could play in terms of the development of artificial intelligence. And so this is all really quite new areas, and so but these are conversations that we have had, and so we hope that we can open up and other people can kind of take on some of these comparative work as well.
Fabulous, thank you.
Great, thanks, Niki and Sojin and Delia. It is quite interesting to think of this collaboration. It's actually quite rare, I think. So I think it's a really positive thing. I really hope you guys do continue with this. Yes, we still have time for more questions. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask? Yeah, Sue, please go ahead.
This is, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. This is a content question, actually, because I was looking at your table of contents, and I'm very interested in Niki and someone else, I think, who's also here, about you wrote about the Moonies and Tzu Chi. And I'm just very curious about the comparison. Obviously, I should read the chapter, but just from an outsider's perspective, someone who's not in religious studies, it seems like, you know, Tzu Chi is, at least in Taiwan, is seen to be very positive, you know, doing lots of good works, whereas Mooney seems to have a more negative kind of association. So I'm just really curious about how you compared the two.
Natasha, are you there, Natasha? Yes, and my co-author was here. I'm not sure if she's on mute. If not, I will. I'll try to remember what we done. I think you did. I think, Sue. I think you recognize the kind of important differences when we made. So we obviously looked at similarities and we looked at differences. One of the ways. So this is obviously is perception. Is one of the key things that we looked at in terms of the difference. But it's also who perceiving it, right? So one of the areas of which that we did look at was the relocation after the Typhoon Morakot of the Taiwan indigenous people into housing in and around Taidong as a result of the work that's been done on Tzu Chi and the sorts of things that they implemented, like a no drinking ban and stuff like this. So it is, again, also about perception was an area in which that we did look at. I think for us, it was looking at the origins of new religious movements. And so this idea of where certain associations would take on responsibilities for welfare when the state were unable to, or the state didn't. And it was to look at how both the establishment of the Unification Church, the Moonies, and of Tzu Chi was really both born out of this period of when degrees of welfare would have been shaped by these new religious movements that we start to see merging in that process of economic change over the course of the 70s and 80s. So that was really where that particular chapter centered on, but it wasn't, one of the key things for us in the comparison wasn't always just to get a like with like, right? We feel that actually if we do that, it removes so much of the nuances, and we wanted to make sure that actually there are many things that are very different between Korea and Taiwan. They're not the same place. They have very different historical trajectories, but there are similarities, and we wanted to highlight those similarities, but give voice to those differences. And this was one of those chapters where we co-write. So Natasha comes from the Korean studies side, I came from the Taiwan studies, but we weren't necessarily looking at this is all about Tzuji, this is all about the Unification Church, but actually how the formation of these two organizations actually had very similar development stages, and why were those, and what was going on socially at the time within both locations to see the emergence of these two different organizations. And so in a particular chapter, we say that actually other comparisons could be made on other social movements in both Korean context as well as in Taiwan. And we could have made this, we could use the same methodology, but within different organizations. But we opted for these two things as just a way of exploring that. Yeah, I hope that.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'll have to read their chapter. It sounds very, very interesting.
No worries.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Nikki. Are there, oh, Evan, you've raised your hand. I can't see you, but oh, there you are. Please go ahead.
Sorry, as Nikki said, have to make sure I'm unmuted. So I'm really curious about the multiple products that came out of this project. Partly, I guess I didn't realize they existed. I feel a little cheated out of a lovely barbecue. So maybe down the road someday. No criticism. I just came to this late. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between these multiple products that came out of that initial conference, and sort of how the Korea special volume and the Taiwan special volume intersect then with this final joint or collective product.
Yes, so when we had the lineups, we had to think about whether we can have any kind of platform to compare. For example, the colonialism experience, obviously, is the thing, but in terms of North Korea itself, it's quite unique because they tend to talk about the North Korean security issue, North Korean nuclearization issue, or North Korean international relations issues, which is not simply compared with the Taiwan studies part. So those chapters, those presentations during the workshop, we decided to have the special issue. So we published it in a North Korean review journal with North Korean topics. Then we came up with the other chapters about this comparison edited book. And then likewise in the Taiwan side, like migration, we didn't have anybody who could write about migration in Korean studies side. It's also about the availability of chapter writers. So that was why, even though it was really interesting topic, we could not come up with in the edited volume. So we decided to have it as a special issue for Taiwan studies part. So Lara Momesso, one of other colleague at UCLan, worked on that with Niki about the Taiwan special issue. So that's how we combined and selected. And also it was about the author's intention, whether they want to publish in journal or in edited volume, right? Yeah. And especially about the economic side, as a matter of fact, we can say that we already started this comparison about this economic development side, because many of the books already or journals talked about the Four Tigers development, and Taiwan and South Korea have been included all the time and been compared in a way. So apart from the Tom Gold, Professor Tom Gold we also had another author who participated in the workshop about the Korean economic development, but he did not want to be involved in this edited volume because he had already too much work to do. So in that kind of a sense that we had to organize and work on the thing. So that's how we came up with two different special issues and one edited book.
Yeah, so just to kind of pick up on that, I think the one with the North Korea, as I said, that really that final conversation we were having where people were identifying the fact that, you know, they're working on North Korea as being a, we couldn't really define it. Is it a subfield? Is it a field? And that was a very interesting conversation that we had. And it reminds me of potentially early conversations that people were having with the formations of Taiwan study, whether or not that they were having these similar kinds of conversations. And so the idea was to put together the book for the North Korean Review, really kind of stemmed out of that conversation. The special issue is with the European Journal of East Asian Studies, which was the journal that we submitted the special issue to. The title was Negotiating Legacies, Opposing, Interrupting and Recreating Taiwan's Ongoing Experience. And I'm just going through some of the, I co-edited this with Lara Momesso, so one of our colleagues who co-directs the Northern Institute for Taiwan Studies. So we put together this with a list of looking at different parts. It has quite a strong historical angle, looking at Taiwan historiography. So yeah, if you search this rather than me just kind of read out who did that. So there was a number of different authors that both participated in the conference, but also people who didn't, and we were able to just kind of invite them to contribute. And we do promise, Evan, honestly, the next time when we do a book launch and the things and we can all fly and we can bring people in and we can come together, I promise you we'll be the first on the list to have the special barbecue in the nature reserve. I promise.
I appreciate that. It looked like such a lovely spot. I really was that grabbed my attention, and I look forward to also tracking down the special issues as well. Thank you.
Because I don't know if I might be able to post it in the chat box here actually.
As a matter of fact, we had these photos from this barbecue scene, but intentionally did not include because I thought ever to think.
Yeah, so I put it into the chat thing. I think everyone can see that.
No, actually.
Yeah, not yet.
I might have gone to Lennon actually. I think I can
no wonder I said I can see it. I'll post it again.
Okay, I've got it to everyone now.
Okay, great.
Learning this technology. Yeah, so I think everyone's got it now.
Yeah, make sure to click on that and open it now, because of course you won't be able to after the session ends. Okay, so Evan will get his barbecue after all. I hope we're all invited at some point. It looks
always,
really nice.
Always.
We're just talking to Songjin. We'll actually be able to fly to UK now from Australia.
Yeah, it's green light list for UK. So Australia is the allowed country to travel.
Right. If you can get a permission, you can fly there.
Yeah, good luck with that. Australian citizens can't get in here.
Well, I also got a question to Niki and Songjin, maybe to other colleagues here from UK. We're starting this association here, and I know Taiwan Studies has been long established in SOAS, but how about other universities or areas outside SOAS? Is it a emergent or booming area of study, or do you get any interference or barriers when you are talking about Taiwan studies in your university?
I mean, the short answer is no, we don't. we have 5 colleagues who are employed on the basis of the work that they do on Taiwan. They're not part of another teaching program. They don't teach Chinese studies, but research Taiwan. They're there because of their focus on Taiwan, and we not receive barriers. Actually, I think the strength of our Korean program enables us to have the freedom to kind of explore Taiwan that bit more, because we have Korean studies, Japanese studies, Chinese studies, right? By far our largest is Korean studies. We have an intake of more than 100 students per year to do Korean. And our second is Japanese, which is around 60 to 80. And Chinese studies is around 20 students. So we don't have very strong Chinese studies field within our university, which I think has enabled us to be able to say, right, let's explore this. So we have a second year module that teaches Taiwan in the Asia Pacific. I teach on the postgraduate course in MA in Asia Pacific Studies, which has a course that is, from this coming academic year will be co-taught between National Jinji University and us. So it will be an online course that I have students both from Taiwan and the UK. And so the field itself, began in SOAS, but I mean, it's really big in Europe. I mean, there are a number of different European centers that we have. So the European Association of Taiwan Studies that was born out of SOAS is definitely, wouldn't say as a product. We've had at least 3 conferences within the UK, one at Portsmouth University in the very south. We've had Nottingham, there's a big program at Nottingham. So Jenny Lee runs the big program out of Nottingham, the Taiwan Studies program in Nottingham. So there is a number of things, but it's in no way is it a competition, because we have different areas of expertise. And in Europe, there are a number of different universities that teach Taiwan. The University of Ljubljana, where Sasha, I know that Jung-Sim mentioned Sasha's name earlier on, so she established the association there. We have a campus in Cyprus, and we are looking at opening up the Taiwan Studies program through our sister campus in Cyprus. The European Association of Taiwan Studies conference next year will be on the Cyprus campus. So we're obviously hoping that things settle and we can become normal people again and start to see the bottom half of people, right? Rather than just shoulders and heads. So we're doing that. And so, so I mean, it's definitely, it's a growing, I would say it's a growing area of interest within this. We're seeing more and more people who have been very discipline focused, but are looking at applying research, whether comparatively or not, and as Taiwan. So each conference we're seeing new familiar faces, but also new faces as well, whereas people are approaching us because their research touches upon Taiwan. So I have a PhD student that's looking at gastro diplomacy, and one of her comparisons is to look at this in the case of Taiwan. So she presented for the first time at the European Association of Taiwan Studies. So we do, we have more and more people who are having a focus. And of course, all of those of us who wrote our PhDs on Taiwan have gone into programs that are teaching it and attracting others to kind of follow as well. So I think what you have done to do this centered in Australia, but to look at it regionally, I think is a fantastic thing. Obviously, I want to at some point have conversations with you, Lennon, about how the association is, because I know that there's a colleague of ours named Ragnar who's tried to do this in Indonesia beforehand, but it never really kind of took off. But so I don't know in what encompassing Australasia, or whether or not to think about expanding it, because I know that there are colleagues in Southeast Asia who have very strong interests in Taiwan studies, but there isn't an association there that they form part of. In terms of obviously other areas, Japan, the Japanese Association of Taiwan Studies is another one that we see is developing. More and more colleagues from Japan are coming out of speaking Japanese to present their work at conferences in English. I would say over the past 10 years, I've noticed more and more Japanese submissions to the European Association. And so I think this is great. I think the field is growing. Obviously, our new book series and the fact that Brill have taken this on. And also there's the journal with Brill, the Journal of Taiwan Studies, that is the chief editor being Ming Rawnsley. I think is emphasize the importance that, you know, that the field of study has.
Well, happy to have a chat later.
I have a question related to the teaching of Taiwan studies in the universities. I think the big problem in Australia is that it is very hard to get students to study Taiwan studies. Yeah, because yeah, not that easy to have that many students to support the continuing of the programs. Can you talk a little bit about the backgrounds and the sources of students in Europe?
Yeah, so I think it varies. Obviously, with the program at SOAS, one of the main areas there are students who are interested in politics, but again, that's a product of the work that Daffy Fell does. So in his area of expertise, then obviously the students are attracted to that. So we on our program, we have about, so our second year module, Taiwan in the Asia Pacific, gets around 50 students registered for that class. So every year that class is that we focus a lot on the culture. As I mentioned earlier in the talk, my own research explores a lot to do with Austronesian speaking peoples. And so that is one area of where there is interest. So the students are interested in looking at how Taiwan sits within the wider Pacific. So I often will approach the class as Taiwan as the only Chinese speaking Pacific island, right? So layers of colonization have meant that different languages are spoken amongst different Pacific Island peoples. So we have French Polynesia spoken French, we have the Marquesas where Spanish is still spoken, but we also have the English speaking Pacific Islands. And so for me, one of the areas in which that I approach our students is to say, Taiwan is a Pacific Island. Taiwan is part of the Pacific Island community based upon its heritage. It has a settler society of which brought the language with. And so there is an interest amongst the students to follow the conversation from that. I think obviously the stuff that Sojin and I have done in terms of comparing it to Korean has made it an interest to the students who are studying Korean. But I think different places, the students are coming with different interests, and I'm aware that obviously it is complicated to get universities to establish programs, but one key way of doing it is incorporating it more into the existing curricula, right? And so we do this with our first year. So our first year's compulsory module is taught by someone who specializes in Taiwan. So it's coming into students' work from the first year of their studies to come to the second year where they can opt to take this particular module. They can. We also have the option of students to do their year abroad, their study abroad in Taiwan. This is something that we're just beginning, whereas now most of our students do go to Korea. But there are more and more students who are quite interested in, although that they're doing Korean, are interested in actually doing their year abroad somewhere that's not in Korea, which is very interesting considering that you're learning the language and you go on your year abroad somewhere that doesn't speak that language. But they are interested in looking at this. And I think comparative studies is really an interesting way to which to bring students and the interest within Taiwan. And once we start to demonstrate that there is that interest, then it's an easier thing to sell. I mean, trying to establish the Taiwan Institute was actually really difficult. Obviously, we talk about the fact that, yes, we've done this and we've established this at UCAN, but actually getting it off the road was very complicated. Obviously, there were concerns from senior management on what would be the reaction to this. Would there be a reaction? Obviously, a large number of our overseas students do come from China, and they were often, the conversations is what would be the reaction to this. And, you know, I remind them that that there is a Taiwan studies program at the University of Xiamen. So it's not like it's silence. I mean, the idea of studying Taiwan is something that happens in China itself. So, you know, the idea of when we established the Institute was in order to facilitate conversations, right? And the university, I think we were quite positive that university gave me the full support to initiate this, and there, you know, has been no reaction to this, as there wasn't in other areas that we see this program, particularly in the United States. More, we got the new, they've got ones at University of Austin, Texas. We have Washington, University of Washington. So I mean, you know, they're opening everywhere, and so I think it's, the reality is that you know, it is an important place to be studying in its own right. And I think universities are acknowledging this. I just think that the way to show it is through student interest, and that comes about by incorporating that into our lesson. That answered your question, Phyllis. I felt like I gave a really long speech.
Well, can I
Thank you.
just follow up with what Niki said to Phyllis' question? I'm not so sure about whether it's because we don't have enough students. But my feeling, or based on my situation at the moment, is that the university doesn't really want this kind of program to exist. So, for example, I was thinking to have a Taiwan center in my university. I won't mention which one I'm teaching in. I did get a lot of resistance from the managerial level, saying that no, we are not going to have a Taiwan studies in program. So that's what I found. That's the reason why I was asking you two about the development of Taiwanese studies in Europe, whether you have this kind of resistance as well from the university for the top-down one telling you not to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I think for us, as I said, I think the main explanation is that there isn't a competition. We don't have a very large, but there are places such as Nottingham, for example, that does have the Taiwan Studies program, but it also has a campus in Ningbo, right? Nottingham Ningbo campus. So here you have a university has a direct relationship with universities in China, but there seems to be a resistance, and they have a very strong China program. See, it was initially led by Steve Sang before he moved to SOAS, and now you've got Jonathan Sullivan and Jenny Lee, who are obviously really big names in terms of the study of both cross-strait relations, as well as Taiwan and Chinese politics. But I mean, I don't know what resistance that they had in the initial onset. And I think what's really important for the success of the program is the continued support by the Taiwan government, right? And I think critical for this is support. And I think that plays such an important role in the way in which that we do it. So we have a very close relationship with the Taiwan embassy here in the UK, and I think that relationship is important, and the management are observant of that relationship. So the idea that both the Korean government and the Taiwan government sponsored the same workshop at a university that's perhaps not necessarily seen in the UK on the levels of Oxford and Cambridge, but we're able to bring these things together. I think our university recognise that, and I think also it is down to how the university sees itself, right? And whether or not that it, sees how this can help future-proofing potential programs at the university. And I think the establishment, I think the thing I tried to convince the university, whether it's real or not, this was the thing that I tried to convince, that actually the institutes that we've established help to future-proof the Asia-Pacific Study Program at our university. That actually we need these things for students to be part of a wider community of which that they're studying. And what we have seen is that irrespective of changes, significant changes that we've had in the UK, obviously the first one, 2016 with Brexit, our decision to leave the European Union and the effect that would have on students coming in from the EU. And then, of course, we had the pandemic. We haven't seen a decline in our student numbers, where other programs within the university have, as are many other universities, both within the UK and without. And I think we can say that actually what we're doing, or what we try to do, is playing a role within giving attention to these areas, and then, you know, in turn we attracting the students. And bums on seats obviously is the management thing, is the thing that is the most important. So as long as we keep doing that, I think we continue to get the support that we need.
Thanks, Niki. We still have Abraham, Wayne, and Hannah here. We need more support from you two, you all.
Yeah, it's a difficult mix of institutional issues and political issues in Australia that are really holding us back. But I think the universities are the real problem. Sorry, Charles has had his hand up for a while. So Charles, do you want to jump in here? You might be muted. I muted you at some point. There we go. Nope.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Am I okay? Yeah. Okay. Yes, I appreciate the organizers of this program. I'm from Nigeria, and I just want to add my voice to the response given by Niki earlier about the desire to study Taiwan, especially from, I'm looking at it from the perspective of African study. I teach here in the University of Lagos, and I have done what he said, the advice he gave, and that is that you would introduce Taiwan studies in an environment where it would raise some kind of concern to a particular group of people. For example, it might bring about a lot of questioning, trying to bring out the PRC, the ROC. For example, in my university, there is a computer book. When I tried to teach Taiwan literature, Department of English, because I did my PhD on Yang Mu and the Nigerian poets. It was like, oh no, you know, Taiwan, China, Taiwan, please, you have to be careful. I said, no. I know this government, Nigeria, does not recognize Taiwan. Yes, that is a fact, but I am into cultural studies. And that was the only way I was able to get through the troubled waters at that point in time. So there's exactly no course for me, like Taiwan studies or Taiwan literature, but I single out selected poets, incorporate them in my syllabus, and then try to teach my students. And in doing that, I introduce Taiwan history, Taiwan culture. Then I hope to someday, when I become a professor, I'm not yet one, to introduce the Association of Taiwan Studies in Africa. And basically, because I see Taiwan as an interesting environment. I've been there 3 times. I have been a scholar. I've given the award to study in Taiwan at National Donghua University. I spent close to a year. I've been there 3 times. So I have developed so much interest in the study of Taiwan, and I also want to see that my people here in Nigeria, and especially in the western part of Africa, and then we can spread ahead, also begin to study Taiwan, because indeed for me it's an interesting, rich cultural area for us to explore. I mean, that's just all I feel I should add. In any case, by the time that association is going to kick off, I've talked to a friend in Canada, Christopher Locke, who happened to also invited me to Canada for a training on Chinese migration. I would contact some of you people to give me your ideas and support for the establishment of the association. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. So, wow, Taiwan studies in Nigeria. That's fantastic. Glad to hear that you're trying to incorporate it into your syllabus. I couldn't hear, it was the connection was a little bit difficult to hear at times. Did you have a question at the end? It sounded like you didn't.
No.
if you do have a question, maybe put it in the chat box because it's quite difficult to hear.
No, I think Charles was saying that he wants to get in contact with some of us and see what we're doing.
Great. Charles, how did you hear about this book launch?
Oh, okay. It was sent to my email. Yes, because I get emails from these. I get emails from European Association of Taiwan Studies and also NASA, because I belong to the association. So they also send me emails. So it was from that email that I was able to.
Great.
Get about.
Great. I'm glad. Well, I'm glad the email for this book launch went out widely. You're really welcome to join us. Really glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Sojin, I don't know if you could hear clearly. Do you have any comments on this? Perhaps on incorporating Taiwan into various classrooms, or on Taiwan studies in Nigeria.
Yeah, it was not so clear for me to figure out. I was like leaning on almost to speak. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, it was quite surprising to hear that in Nigeria with the Taiwan studies, and hopefully we can have Korean studies as well. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for telling us about this, Charles. Sorry, Nikki, did you have a comment as well?
No, I was just going to say, I think it followed what you said, really, Craig. What wonderful news to hear. I think, having this online format does bring together people that wouldn't ordinarily be together. And I think that this is great and so encouraging to know that the seeds of Taiwan study are being sown across the globe. So the idea of a future African Association of Taiwan Studies, I think is wonderful. And I think let's get this off the ground and get this successful, and then we can start crossing continents, right? I think that's great. So Charles, keep at it. It's and do reach out to us.
Absolutely. We're bringing Korean and Taiwan studies, from Asia to Australia, Europe, UK, and now Africa, all in this one room. This is really impressive. Okay. Anybody else have any last comments? If not, we're almost out of time. So I'm going to turn it over to Jung-Sim. Please go ahead.
I wanted to thank Niki. I read your tribute, and that makes me a little bit, it's not sad, but looking back those time with Bruce. So thank you for that. And Sojin, thank you.
So Jung-Sim, obviously we're with you. It's we wish we could be there in person, but yeah, where we are.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And yeah, congratulations to everybody on this fantastic volume. And thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm going to hand it over to our dear president and party chairman Lennon to say farewell.
Well, what I can say is thank you everyone, Jung-Sim, Sojin, Niki, for your great presentation. Of course, Abraham as well for your time be with us tonight. It's good to learn about this fabulous book. I've already ordered a book. Asked my university to order the book, and of course, Jung-Sim has done that as well. And I'm definitely going to get myself a book. Our next seminar, as I said, will also coming from Europe. I don't know why. It seems that more Taiwanese study academics are in Europe than in this region. We have Defios to talk about his new book on Green Party in Taiwan, and we'll definitely send out the information when we have the date confirmed. And I hope to see you all there. Thank you again. Thank you for your support of ATSA and ATSA, and I look forward to see you all in the near future. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you. Thank you, Lennon. Thanks, Craig. And thanks, Phyllis, for organizing this fantastic workshop.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Really
very
great
much,
to see you all.
everyone. So lovely to see you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Lennon and Craig.
Thank you,
It was really good to have the opportunity. And yeah, in the future, if you have some chance to see in person or in Australia or here in the UK, yeah, then let's have a good time that time then. Thank you, and stay safe.
I wish to go to that beautiful.
Oh, we have a lot of those kind of scenery places around. So yeah, anytime.
Well, hopefully we can meet in Cyprus next year.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Taiwan studies one. Yeah, so
When's that
Cyprus.
gonna be?
Yeah, sorry.
You know when it is?
Oh, I'm not so sure when the date will be. I will update to you once we can have the, because my colleagues are organizing that because it's from Japan anyway. So as I said, in Niki, Lara, and we have Tian Chang from Taiwan. So Tian and Moses, Adina, 5 of my colleagues are preparing for that. Okay. So I think they now talk about with the Cyprus campus when and how, and they want to see whether it can be held physically in place or.
Wait, Craig, can you stop recording? We have to do some